Hi guys, hope you're well. We're back in John's Gospel for our Bible study. We're in chapters 18 through to 21, picking up from sort of verse 12 of chapter 18 where I left off last time. I'm going to do two parts on this, so I'm not going to cover it all today. It's so rich, I can't cover it all in two parts, but I want to just focus in on something quite specific today, and that's Peter. And I think John's quite deliberate in how he writes about Peter and wants us to see some things here. And I think this one is to speak to us today. I feel this is more than just a study. So I'd encourage you to soften your hearts, be ready to hear from God. Do keep studying, keep messaging me, keep sending in thoughts. I'm enjoying everybody's reflections and what the Holy Spirit is speaking into individuals' hearts as we study this book together. So again, read chapters 18 through to 21 over this week and next week before we then begin a new series. And so in John chapter 18, from verse 12, you get John deliberately interweaving the trial of Jesus with Peter's denials. And I think that's very deliberate. And so Jesus is getting trialed first by Annas, the previous high priest. He's still called the high priest. And then you come on to Caiaphas and then Pilate, which we'll come back to. And then you interweave with that is you're getting Peter's denials. And you'll know the story where Peter denies Jesus 3 times and then the cock crows, after Peter had been so confident that he would never deny Jesus. And I just want to draw a couple of points out from there. I think there's a real deliberate comparison that John wants us to get, that there is some similarities, that actually both of them are sort of superficially known. Jesus is superficially known by the high priest, by Annas, and they think they know who Jesus is, but they don't really know. And the same with Peter. He's sort of superficially been seen around Jesus. And both of them are facing sort of an escalating scale of accusation. So it starts with Peter with a servant girl, and it ends with a relative of the person that Peter cut their ear off. It's ramping up. It's like Peter starts with he should have won the first battle, but he lost when it was easier, and it ramped up from there. And Jesus is facing the same, this increasing ramping up before ultimately he gets sent to Pilate. And I think this is really helpful. I read in one commentary that Jesus denies nothing, whereas Peter denies everything. And that's a helpful summary. But there's this contrast that John wants us to see. Do not depend on men. Okay, depend on Jesus. And I would encourage you to do that today. Do not depend on man. Depend on Jesus. Depend on His word. Don't just listen to me. Read it. Read it, be full of His Spirit. Know Jesus. Jesus is the one who's dependable, who never denies, whose word will never change. But there's this lovely link, and this is where I want to really land in. There's this lovely link in verse 18 that John drops in. So he says, when Peter's around the fire and he denies to the servant that he knew Jesus, he says this: it was cold, and the servant and the officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Now, just interesting imagery about fire, and you think of the things we've looked at Jesus being the light of the world, and it's around that light that Peter seems to be in the darkness. But also fascinating is that word fire is used just twice in John's Gospel. Guess the other time it's used in chapter 21. So we whiz forward to chapter 21, verse 9, and that's the rest. So Jesus has now been put on trial, he's been crucified, he's resurrected, and now this is Peter's reappeared to Mary Magdalene, reappeared to the disciples. This is Jesus having done a miraculous catch of fish, helped the disciples again on the shore. He's gone back to their roots, and he's feeding them breakfast, he's barbecuing them breakfast on the beach. And this word appears again at the restoration of Peter. Very powerful. I think John wants us to see, even in Peter's denial, that Jesus is sovereign and he's going to restore him. So this word appears, fire, for the second time in verse 9 of 29. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals, and there was fish on it. Same Greek word for fire. And then this passage is then you get the reinstatement of Peter. And I want us to see this. It's such a powerful passage. It's verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." And this is the gracious, gentle restoration of Jesus Christ. Peter has messed up royally, and yet Jesus just gently restores and reinstates him. It doesn't change his call. It doesn't change his position as a loved son of the king. It doesn't change the relationship. He just gently restores him. And just an incredible, gracious encounter. And yet in the midst of that, this is the bit I want us to see. You think Peter's just going to be rejoicing in that gentle restoration. But read this. I think this is what I feel stirred in my own spirit, because I think we do this. Verse 20, Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. So Peter's just had this gracious, gentle restoration. It's like we've been saved from the muck and our sin, and Jesus is so gentle and loves us and restores us, and yet we turn our head in comparison to a brother and sister in Christ. It's not just me that's done that. I know it isn't. We turn our head. This is exactly what Peter does. He's gently and graciously restored incredibly. And he's actually told, Jesus basically tells him, you're gonna have he's indicating that you're gonna die for you're gonna be martyred, you're gonna become a Christian martyr for me. And Peter's content in that until he turns his head and he says, Lord, what about him? Maybe you've done that. Lord, what about him? Why has it not worked out for me? Why do I have to suffer like this? Why? I don't know. Maybe you're comparing yourself to others during lockdown, going, why are they on furlough on good pay and I'm slogging my guts out here? Or why are they doing this or why are they able to, whatever it might be? Why are they married? Why are they? There's comparison. We look at social media. Why do they seem to have such a perfect family life? Why do we compare? And Jesus says, run your race. What is it to you? Your sacrifice, your call, your race. That's what Jesus is concerned about. He's concerned about his relationship with you, his walk with you. He doesn't want you turning your head to the left or to the right. He's graciously saved you, and he's called you for his purposes. Follow him. Do not compare. The spirit of the age brings comparison. Do not compare. I was reading last night, studying 1 Corinthians 12, and spiritual gifts, and it's the same thing there. It's when Paul's talking about, you and I, he's describing the body, and it's like an eye can't say to the foot, I don't need you, or a foot can't say to he's don't compare. And he goes on, that beautiful chapter in 1 Corinthians 13 about love. Love is not self-seeking. Like there's not envy or jealousy or rivalry. Comparison is not the sort of love we are called to. It's not love at all. Does not have a spirit of comparison. I feel really stirred about this in my own spirit. We're to run the race Jesus Christ has called each one of us to individually. And that goes for us as a church as well. We're not to have a spirit of comparison with other churches or whatever church you're part of. Don't compare to everything. Oh, this church is doing, rejoice in each different church doing different things. Rejoice in each different individual doing different things. And we're going to be called to different sacrifices as individuals, and that's okay. That's the way Jesus works. And then in verse 22, this is important. Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. You must follow me. And this hit me hard this morning, if I'm honest. What is that to you? And we know John lives a long life. He writes late into life. And I think most scholars would date he lived well into his early 90s and probably died of natural causes, whereas church history would suggest that Peter was martyred in the late 60s, AD 67 perhaps, in his 60s. And so they did come to very different ends, and Jesus is like, what is that to you? And so I just want to encourage you today. I hope that does encourage you that we are called to run an individual race, the race marked out for us, that God has an ordained plan. His will, his plan is perfect, and it's not to be compared to the left or to the right. I think when we have a spirit of comparison, that's when we lose our joy. Because we start going, oh, well, what about him? How come he gets to do it like that? And oh, they just seem to, it all seems to go well for them, and I just seem to be struggling on, and we lose our joy when we compare. Just run the race that Jesus has for you today. Whatever that might be faithful with everything he puts before you. Serve him wholeheartedly. Whatever you do, do it as if for the Lord. Love those around you, love your family, love those you come into contact with. Serve him faithfully and resist the urge to compare with those around you. Perhaps for some of you, you need to delete your Facebook or whatever so that you don't constantly compare and look at other lives. Yeah, let's not have a spirit of comparison. Let's have a spirit of faithfulness and love, where we run the race marked out for us and we love and prefer others and those around us and rejoice in their triumphs and their joys. I hope that blesses you today. I'm praying for each and every one of you. I'm loving John's gospel. It's so rich. Catch you guys soon. Thanks ever so much.